The International Newsnet World Report is a national television news show available in more than 30 million homes. We broadcast daily real news the networks won't tell you. We are solely viewer-supported. That means you. You can donate at our website, INNWorldReport.net. We hope you find the following interview informative and helpful.
We're joined in the INN studio by author Fatema Keshavarz. Her latest book is Jasmine and Stars, Reading More Than Lolita in Tehran. Welcome to the INN studio.
Thanks for having me.
Why did you feel you had to write a counter to Reading Lolita in Iran?
Well, I teach things to do with Iranian literature and culture, and in 2003 when the book came out, suddenly everyone was asking me about this book. Have you read this book? Have you read this book? And then I read the book, and then the author visited our campus, and I basically saw the way this book simplified Iran into this image of villains and victims, you know, kind of black, very, very simplified black and white picture of Iran. And in that picture, I didn't recognize the people I saw and the people I've known all my life, who are just like anyone else in the world, you know, very normal, vibrant, humorous, intelligent people.
Well, that book portrays the Iranian people as victims of fundamentalist Islam. Now, your book does something else. Tell us a little about the book itself.
You know, I don't, in some fundamental ways, Nafisi and I are both want good things for Iran. But what I am saying is that Iranians are not voiceless victims. The society is much more diverse than that book lets people know. For example, when you read Reading Lolita in Tehran, you think that Iranians can't read Western literature. Well, Iranians read tons of Western literature. And in fact, there's a book fair in Tehran every year that brings about 2 million people to Tehran to this book fair. 33% of what Iranians read is Western literature. So it's a very lopsided, exaggerated image of Iran. But not only they read Western literature, Iranians produce tons of literatures themselves. Right at the moment when she was writing this book, there were Iranian women writers I talk about in my book, like Shahrnush Parsipur, for example, wrote her wonderful book, Women Without Men, which is a critique of patriarchy in Iran. So, you know, Iranians very much have a voice, and I think what the world, including Americans, need to know is that that voice is out there. We just don't hear it because it's masked.
Can you tell us a little bit about the title and the words Jasmine and Stars?
Sure. You know, I wrote at some point research on medieval poet and mystic Rumi, and he talks about wonderful teachers as stars. You know, he says if you're lost in the desert, you look at the stars and find your way, but the stars don't ever talk to you. In other words, they just teach you by being there. And the stars are the people in my book. And some of them are, you know, like my grandmother or my uncle, the painter. Others are like Parsipur, the writer, or Farooq Farrokhzad, who even died before the Iranian Revolution. But my life was brightened by the presence of these very ordinary and sometimes very famous Iranians who were stars in my life, and I wanted to share my stars with my American readers.
Well, in the book you mentioned Zahra Kola as an Iranian woman. Is she a real person? Did you model this after an actual person?
She's a fictional character, but I think she's a very important fictional character because Parsipur writes her, she's a prostitute. And she's one of the most charming fictional characters produced in post-revolutionary Iran. And she is, you know, the life and the soul of this book. She has her own happiness. She learns to get away from the brothel, build her own life. And she becomes, in the end, kind of the source of this spiritual force in the book. And so many people would not be able to imagine a prostitute as such a positive, charming figure in post-revolutionary Iran. And that's exactly the point I have, that the conflict between the two countries are now looming so large that we miss the people in there. But Parsipur creates this most charming fictional character who's a prostitute.
In America, we have a sense that Iran is mostly a patriarchal society. Are there families in Iran which are headed by the women, that the women is a strong force within the family?
Oh, very many. Very many. You know, I think that that's exactly where things go wrong when we assume that tradition could be totally overpowering. You know, tradition in some areas might be working much more powerfully than others. For example, Iranian women now form 70% of the university students. If this trend continues, in a matter of a decade and a half, 2 decades, the majority of scientists in Iran will be women. So, you know, to imagine that because the society has inherited a very old patriarchal tradition, which is now negotiating and changing, that these women have no place in the society is totally, totally not true.
What role do women have in democracy in Iran, coming democracy as it emerges from the power of the mullahs?
I think that they have a very, very prominent role from the moment of the revolution. I mean, the 1979 revolution also, Iranian women were very active. They've continued to keep the issue of gender on the agenda of the parliament. Iranian parliament now has just under 20% women, about 18.5% women. The goal is in the next election 30%. That, by the way, would be twice as many women in the Turkish parliament, for example. And women are very active. Women, feminists have a broad coalition among themselves, which range from nationalist to religious to totally secular, and they work together. In academia, as I told you, women are very, very prominent. Women are the top fiction writers in Iran. Women are great filmmakers in Iran. So in any way that men can influence the positive change that I believe is taking place in Iran, despite the setbacks. You know, emerging democracies always face setbacks. You cannot expect, you know, things after century and century of monarchic rule, for example, that we would suddenly have a fully bloomed democracy. But in the emerging democracy, I think women have a very powerful voice, and what we can do, instead of considering them voiceless victims, is to make their voices audible, bring it into the American culture. That's one of the things I'm trying to do there.
What are the struggles left for women in Iran? Are they equal? Are they getting close to equal? What are the battles that are going on right now for equality by women?
Well, I think we have to look at, are we talking about women in villages? Are we talking about large cities?
I'm talking about mostly the law and how it's being implemented, and how it may be being ignored.
Right. No, I don't think it's ignored at all. I think that we have to bring the issue of class and economic background and all of that in. You know, if you are a woman from an educated family, a family that's relatively well off, then you have a lot of awareness of your right. But if you come from lower classes, you may not have had the same level of exposure to what you need to do. So in other words, women in Iran face very many other social issues that other women face elsewhere in the world. But there are certain gender laws we would like to see changed. There are certain gender laws that have changed. So it's